I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This week on the Poetry of Predicament podcast, we're going to be continuing with the ongoing series of mental health issues in our predicament-laden world. And this week we're talking with Dr. Gregg Miklashek about his extensive experience as a psychiatrist on the front lines in mental health delivery of services and his many overlaps with now very familiar topics like those presented by Gabor Mate in his book, The Myth of Normal. And Dr. Miklashek's emphasis has been on stress and how it affects every aspect of our lives and our mental well-being. Please help me welcome Dr. Gregg Miklashek. Welcome back, everybody, to the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I am your ever-present host, Dean Walker. And today I'm continuing in a sporadic series that I've been doing for the past year and will very much continue to do in the coming year about mental health concerns and for that matter, physical health concerns, as they're often interwoven in these extraordinarily challenging times. Have somebody here that just caught wind of, read a couple of comments, I believe is how I first found out about Dr. Gregg Miklashek. And we connected recently, and it seemed like I didn't know that you had written the book that you've written, which you're about to tell us about. And what I particularly was drawn to was you have been really on the front lines of mental health, public health and mental health, providing services through one of the most challenging times in human history. And you've done that not just doing your job, but you then went on to write this extensive book or exploration of what are the key issues going on. And that really rang my bell. As far as I'm concerned, there's still far too little going on that's really relevant in terms of what are the senior most mental health concerns and physical health concerns that we're grappling with, and how do they affect our ability to make sense in our world, make sense of our own lives and the challenges we're feeling on a daily life level, and then also sense making on a public health policy level, and how things like climate change and the other many predicaments we find ourselves in, how are these affecting our mental health and our ability to make sense of our world? So, Gregg, as you've asked that I call you, and I'm pleased to do that. It's been really great to get to know you briefly before this call, and I look forward to hearing much more of you talking about this focal point, this book that you've written that's, again, quite an extensive exploration of exactly this topic. So thanks so much for taking time to speak with us. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind starting. It's going to be a little repetitive because I just a few minutes ago asked you to do a mini version of this as well. But I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about where you are, how long you've been doing what you've been doing, what you've been doing, and then what is this book, Stress R Us, that you have been putting out in various iterations, growing iterations over quite a while. If you would just tell us about that so we can have a baseline for why is this topic so important to you. So welcome here.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks for the kind introduction and the opportunity to do this podcast. I'm not sure who it goes out to or how it gets published, but um, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to uh, address the subjects that you're obviously quite interested in. I've spent a life time as a practicing psychiatrist and
Mhm.
physician, uh, 42 years of caring for the mentally ill. I've been retired now for 10 years. I retired at age 67, so I'm 77. I live in Marietta, Ohio now. I practiced in Grand Rapids, Michigan, pretty much the last half of my psychiatric career. Um, and I've worked in a number of different facilities and a number of different capacities as a staff psychiatrist in mental health clinics and psychiatric hospitals, and also in private practice. I'm as well a certified addiction medicine specialist, um, um, certified from 1990 to 2000. I did not get recertified, but largely my practice had to do with addiction psychiatry and trauma psychiatry.
Mhm.
And as as that practice unfolded, fortunately, I went through a crisis of my own about halfway through, thanks to Valium and alcohol, and had to take a 6 month leave. And when I came back, I knew exactly what it was like to be a patient.
Yeah.
And I am told that I was a totally different person with all the humility that I had previously lacked. And, you know,
Right. Right.
and because the first 20 years, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So I had to pretend the whole time. And the second 20 years, I was listening to my patients and learning from them. And that's really where the book came about.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Thank you. Great summary. And boy, do I have a lot of questions, threads that are very, very alive for me that you've just mentioned. I'd like to just mention, excuse me, a couple of them so that you can know if you want to pursue them or fill them out from your perspective or not. You've mentioned about trauma orientation and addiction orientation in your practice. And those have both been very, very big as I've been putting together what I call transformative support and resources
Yes.
for people bravely facing human-caused collapse of
Mhm.
Earth and human systems. That's more or less like a little elevator pitch for what I do in my work. Is I do my best to provide those resources and support for people who are grappling with may well be the most difficult collective conversation we've ever had to deal with on this planet. So, a couple of voices that have come through loud and clear in my time since writing my book, which I think you mentioned that you took the time to read my book. I thank you. I wow, you and the other four people who have read the book. I
A
really
wonderful
appreciate.
book. Took me 4 hours.
Thank you. That's amazing. Took me about uh, a week to read my own book, so I am envious of somebody who can read that quickly. The threads that I just want to mention, and if they strike a note for you, then please feel free to take it wherever you'd like. One is it's hard to miss these days the work of Gabor Mate, who obviously is also a psychiatrist and has done extensive work with addiction treatment and trauma orientation to a lifespan of mental health concerns that can happen. So, one is anything you might want to say about that track that he, in his most recent book, The Myth of Normal, he's just been on every talk show that's ever existed in the past year to promote that book. And so I think he has quite a bit to say. I know he's not the only one saying it, but again, these days he's prolific. Um, but the other one is the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences uh, survey or research that's been going on and really is the foundation now of trauma-informed treatment, trauma-informed education, human resources in corporations. It's extraordinary how the ACEs program, the research that came out of Kaiser a number of years ago, how that has really shifted and I believe deepened mental health providers' range of how they operate and how effective those mental health offerings are these days. I think it's helped. So those, that's my layman's perspective. Those are a couple of pieces of inspiration that I've been following for a while. And I'm wondering if you would say whatever you'd like to say about those two, and then go wherever you'd like to go that has been your major focus.
Well, thank you for that. And you've hit me where I live
Mhm.
and where my heart is. Gabor Mate is a hero of mine. And I can't recommend his book too highly. He is not a trained psychiatrist. He's trained as a general practitioner,
Right.
but he worked with a population of addicts and alcoholics in East Vancouver, many of whom had other health problems, including HIV. And it was really a very difficult population that the rest of the medical world runs from as fast as they can get away from it. Um, and and I might mention I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict myself, so I particularly tune into that part of his discovery and his own education, because he listened to these people and he really got into the root of where the addiction was coming from, which sadly is often missed and even intentionally avoided in 12-step meetings, which I'm also a great fan of. But I've actually been disallowed from talking and giving my story in 12-step meetings because I was going to mention the fact that I was sexually abused as a child and emotionally and physically abused. And too many AA meetings don't want to hear that. They just want to start with the drinking and not go into the source of where the pain and the fear and the traumatic material, really arises that we're trying to deal with alcohol and drugs. So I try to correct that when I go to the meetings. Sometimes so there are people that one gal yelled out heretic in one of the meetings. So I'm pleased to be a heretic in the recovering community because we need to face the fact that you know when I'm in those rooms these days, at least half the people in the room are trauma survivors.
Yeah.
And I know some of their personal histories, and most of them are severe childhood sexual and physical abuse, very often from alcoholic and addicted parents. I'm down here in southeastern Ohio, so close to West Virginia. These are huge problems down here.
Yeah.
So yeah, and um, I'm of Hungarian ancestry, so my great grandfather was born in Budapest, as was Gabor, and I have the greatest respect for his work. He's a wonderful writer. I did a review on Amazon of his book, and the only thing I could say was my only regret is I didn't write this book.
Right.
So,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
might say the same thing about yours. It's wonderfully researched and it's well written, and I'm so glad to see these books out there now.
Uh, it's very kind of you to say, and I agree with you about Gabor Mate, and I don't know that you and I will have time to get to, or if it's particularly relevant for our conversation, but I tend to be in a similar camp to what he's fairly recently explored and now integrates into his work, which is the use of um, plant medicine ceremonies and you integrating the conscious and sacred use of those plant medicines within a psychotherapeutic container. and which I find extraordinarily useful, powerful, and it's been a big part of my life since I was in my mid-teens. So I'm very much in that camp as well. So again, we may not get that far, but I think it's just
Well,
a
may
bit.
I speak
Yeah.
to that issue?
Oh, sure, please. Yeah.
So when I was in my psychiatry residency in Wisconsin, I discovered marijuana, and unfortunately, because of my own abuse history, I was searching for anything to get me out of me.
Mhm.
And but during that same period of time, I took LSD a half a dozen times, and I talk about it in 12-step meetings, which get some pretty interesting looks about taking LSD on an Indian reservation in northern Wisconsin on the shore of Lake Superior
Right.
and seeing God come down through the clouds, although probably not the creator God. This was probably just one of his fellows, but this a fellow driving a chariot pulled by four chargers. The long flowing hair God. I don't know if that's a projection of the God from within me or what
Mhm.
that was, but it came
Mhm.
down through the clouds like a cloud formation, and just sort of stood there for a little while and then blew away. And
Mhm.
I can see that image as clear today as possible. I was also wandering around in the woods at that time, and Gabor sort of describes some of this in his book about his own experiences. I mean, I heard the water talk. There was a beautiful stream there. It was this wonderful Indian reservation. I saw trees grow, like they were going through their whole lifespan right in front of me. And the inner sense of awe and enormous gratitude and enlightenment was just very much, I think, as other folks experience psychedelic experiences. I might add also that the founder, or one of the two founders, at least, of AA, Bill Wilson, later in his life was heavily involved with LSD,
Mm.
got his entire staff uh, uh, the offices in New York City for AA, including including a Jesuit father, Father Dowling, and his secretaries and everybody else. He got them all involved with LSD. And there's no mention in his biography entitled Pass It On of anybody having bad experiences, because it's so important to be in a supportive environment, to have loving and caring people around you and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, so I get it.
Well, that was unexpected, but a very, very welcome bit of sharing. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um, I'd like to just loop us back because in my, if you could see the work that I offer to folks as sort of a staircase or a ladder, um, the vast majority of folks come in at the entry level, in which they're going from business as usual, really don't have time to think about any of that weird stuff like climate change or, environmental issues or collapse of systems and so on,
yeah,
until something smacks them upside the head. That's
yeah,
my rough way of saying things like a hurricane takes out your city, or
yeah,
we here locally 3 years ago had um, a wildfire that
yes,
swept through and left 10,000 people homeless in 48 hours.
yes,
So something hits hard, whether it's very, very personal and intimate, or it's your region, your town, your
yes,
family, whatever it is, something rattles a person enough to say, wow, I'm hit. It's something,
yeah,
this is a tough thing and we need to fix it. Like, it comes to mind the folks in Hurricane Sandy, which was called a superstorm.
yeah,
They used their everything that they could draw on personally and collectively to stand up and say, we're going to come back stronger. That
yes,
was their commitment. And you could see the same sort of thing down in New Orleans, and so on. This is a pretty common way for people to rally in the face of some sort of disaster or highly stressful time. So the early stages of the work and the support that I offer to people is really basic self-regulation and co-regulation skills. What can get me back into my body and present to the people around me as my family and 50 other families are sleeping in the high school gym. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So those are pretty basic skills, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Just, physical contact, being able to
sure.
just to take my brain from the source of upset to a more neutral set of stimuli and so on. That's the basic level. That's the what I call the first aid level of resilience skills. And so the next level, and it's really the middle zone where most people land for a while, maybe even for years, is once you're out of that emergency mode, you realize I wasn't ready for this. I didn't have a capacity. I was checked out in that high
Yes.
school gym. I couldn't even remember what my name was.
Yeah.
So people start to see, okay, there's some skills, there's some capacities that I can learn, that I can expand to help me be present in the face of larger and larger stressors. And this is where I'm hoping I can get a little bit of whatever the threads are you'd like to share from your book and your extensive coaching and psychotherapeutic intervention with people. I'm very, very interested in how we can offer training and skills and expansion of capacities so that people have the opportunity to be more present,
Sure.
and then to also to be more of service to the people they love when times get tough, because they're going to get tougher for all of us.
Yes, they are.
So that's the sort of the basics of how people can engage in this work. I call the middle section practices of reconnection. And this is the last piece I'll give you about this kind of the foundation of this work is I'm asserting that what got us into this global predicament we find ourselves in is that we've disconnected from deeper self,
Yes.
others, earth, and soul.
Yes.
Maybe you remember that from the book. I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's where the tough work is. That's where it takes, getting a mindfulness practice and doing the son of a gun. And if it's addiction work that I've got to do, I go to my meetings, and whatever it is, your practices will be different than mine. And again, the final word on what I'd like to share about the groundwork that I do is, of course, 10 people in the circle, there are going to be 10 different priorities, 10 different, what's important to you is going to be different than what's important to me. And
Sure.
my practices will be different than yours, but we can learn skills to be of service and hold space for each other in that circle. We can help each other grow, which is much of what I have experienced myself in 12-step programs. But I believe I'm in a very similar boat to what I heard you say, that there's a whole there are whole dimensions that they kind of cut off and don't make
Yes.
accessible in a 12 steps
Yes.
environment. And I
Yes.
think that these are vitally important. It's a lot of where Gabor Mate's gone with Myth of Normal, a lot of what I hear you're starting to describe for us in your orientation. If there's anything I've said that kind of sparks you in a direction, would you go ahead and take it and run?
Well, I like everything you've said, and but what's going through my mind, of course, is my work, uh, and I use the term population density stress.
Mhm.
And one of the factoids of our human experience is we are now 3,000 times more numerous than, and Gabor talks about this, our hunter-gatherer ancestors,
Mhm.
hundreds of thousands of whom still somehow survive on the planet today. And the fascinating difference between those folks is A, they lived in clan social groups. One of my correspondents is Robin Dunbar, the known for the Dunbar number.
Yeah.
Which he calculated that we were evolved to live in a group of about 150 or less of our fellows, and what he's really describing is the clan, and those folks have an intimacy and an interconnectedness that we can't even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
We have been so scattered. My ancestors, like I said, Budapest, Dublin, Liverpool, England,
Mm-hmm.
some little town in West Virginia. I mean, so all of those connections for many of us, or at least most of those connections, have been broken. So we're left alone and vulnerable, and our system does not like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that really initiates the fight or flight response, also known as the stress response.
Yeah.
So we're alienated from the de-stressing, stress reducing aspects of Mother Nature because of our built world that we've filled up so much space with. The automobile is one of my biggest nightmares because it just, it's a near-death experience every time you pass another car. You're in this metal box whizzing along at hundreds of miles an hour potential collision speed. And these things do collide, by the way, and we see it on the evening news all the time. And the human body is not meant to endure that. So we're broken badly by these collisions, et cetera. And we sort of bury all this in our denial, of how dangerous the world is that we've created, filled with noise. I'm a big fan of sound deadening earphones, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't go anywhere in the streets of Marietta without these foam sound suppression things. They're very inexpensive, but you can stick them in your ears and cut down the decibel noise level, significantly.
Yeah.
So I think all of that is causing a constant din of stress induction. And so our cortisol levels are just constantly high.
Yeah.
And cortisol, it controls metabolism, and it does that by regulating it in the liver. And one of the ways it does that is by dissolving our solid organs and bones, dissolving the proteins called gluconeogenesis. And then the amino acids and the breakdown products go to the liver, and they're converted into glucose. So cortisol is only supposed to be elevated when we need, a recharge of energy. And in our world, it's elevated all the time. And that's
Right.
really what I was discovering in my work, and I say it causes all of our diseases. These hunter-gatherer people have none of our diseases of civilization. I love that term, diseases of civilization,
Mm.
which has been around for a long time, and heart disease and stroke and diabetes and obesity and cancer, which I'm getting treated for, all of these things cannot be found in these hunter-gatherer people. Well, why is that?
Yeah.
And here's one other little factoid. We have the same damn genes as they do.
Mm-hmm.
Our genes, your genes out there in Medford, mine here are 99.9% identical to and identical to every other human being on the planet. Due to I could go into why that is, because of climatic catastrophes actually, and asteroids and stuff. So we had to intermarry, and we all end up with the same genes. But so if that's true, and we have all these illnesses and they don't, well, what conclusion does one draw about what's causing the illnesses? Well, obviously it's the environment,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the lifestyle. So this is not a complicated problem, but of course the drug companies do not want us to have this conversation.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah. And neither do the politicians. And forgive me for using the C word, the capitalist corporations that,
Sure.
let's face it, basically run the show. and are constantly pushing for growth because they want more employees so they can pit them against each other and keep labor costs down. And they
Right.
also want them to be the consumers of these products now, so many of which
Right.
come from China, which we seem to want to go to war with, except, what would we get from Walmart if we didn't have China?
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
long answer. I'm sorry.
No, not no sorry there at all. I would just add, in fact, that my own thread that you saw the start of in my 2017 book, The Impossible Conversation, I found myself quoting and talking far more than I could imagine about a guy named Edward Bernays
Oh, yeah.
and
One of my favorites.
the creation of the controlling the narrative, and that
Yes.
controls masses of people, and
Yes.
he became extraordinary at it, and then the
Yeah.
people who have followed on after him have now weaponized it beyond our
Yes.
wildest imaginings.
Yes.
And so what we've got is on the sales side that you were just pointing to, like the corporations want us to be stupid consumers and
Yes.
keep being off center to realize I'm a sovereign being and I don't need this.
Right.
No, they want us off center to do what they're being told to do.
Right.
But there's a similar conversation going on at the level of political and cultural and societal influences, which
Yes.
right now we're in this maelstrom, this 24/7 fire hose
Yes.
of adversarial and pernicious content that
Yes.
is designed to keep us again off center, out of our sovereign self-awareness. And what better, more ripe population than one that is collectively off center than to start to plug in who you really want to go after is those people right over on eye level. Those are the bad guys. You need to fight with them.
Right.
And so it's all set up to keep us constantly off center and then constantly distracted by a false enemy, if you will. So I'm with you. I guess I've gone into my own little mini rant there, but
Well,
I think these are.
what I would
Mhm.
suggest is, from my perspective, again, you're talking about, constant stress,
Mhm.
stress ors, a
Right.
stressor-filled built world. And here we are, these clan social beings whose ancestors spent our entire lifetimes in the same little group of 50 to 150,
Mhm.
and now we're surrounded by strangers without the supports that we previously had. No wonder we're so vulnerable,
Right.
and our stress systems are going nuts. And
Yeah.
what I hear you describing is what I call stress addiction.
Mhm. Mhm.
We have been so climatized, if you will, to borrow a term, to stress that it has become part of our metabolic normal. And so we seek out, I mean, it blows my mind to consider that as a child, my dad would drag me off to Ohio State football games in Columbus. And, today I consider that the greatest nightmare on the planet. I'd rather sit in the middle of a volcano than sit in a stadium full of 100,000 screaming people, watching gladiators. I mean, but so we seek out and look at the media. I mean, my eldest son, runs a video game production group in Brisbane, Australia, and is famous for the game entitled Destroy All Humans,
Mm.
in which the scenario is Martians land and they're trying to eradicate the human race. And in this scenario, you get to be a Martian. And so there's a little, I think he has some unspoken feelings towards his father that he hasn't really relayed. But anyway, um, we're violence addicts.
Mhm.
We love our guns. We love our violence. We love these violent sports. And it's all about keeping that stress system highly activated, as it
Yeah.
literally destroys us and makes us sick.
Yeah.
60% of the adult human population today, so that's roughly 240 million, working age folks, as I understand it, have at least one serious chronic medical problem already. And
Mm-hmm.
the even the mass media is constantly telling us about how 20-year-olds are getting bowel cancers, and the Deaton's work on the diseases of despair. I mean, we're
Yes.
losing the battle right and left, although the drug companies are celebrating, because our need for
Yeah.
more and more of the 4.3 billion prescriptions Americans took in 2021, I believe. I mean, that's one new prescription for every man, woman, and child in our country every month of the year except for one.
Mm-hmm.
So we are just consuming, and every ad on TV, I was watching a little bit last night, as long as I could stand it. And it's just one, drug ad after another. Most of them, I have no idea what the hell they're talking about. I don't know what the condition is.
But the people look really
I wonder
happy
how
in the
the,
commercials.
yeah, I wonder how the viewers have any idea what it is, because they never
Yeah.
name what the condition is, but they're really well
Yeah.
made.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Edward Bernays' influence is
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. I'm with you. Um, Boy, our time is ticking away here, and I want to shift gears if you're ready to.
Sure.
Um, I'd like to shift toward what are the resources, since you've had this extensive career history that's like spot on with this whole conversation. You've also had your own personal uh, grappling with select portions of those issues, and you're also just aware. I would call you collapse aware, person who's aware that if we keep going this way, both individually and collectively, we're going to see things collapse.
Well, I think we're in the
Lives.
middle of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So I'm curious if you could share either from your long history and things that you've seen work over the years and decades, consistently strong resources that people can take on, practices, ways of self-care, self-regulation, co-regulation, any suggestions you might have of things that you've seen be effective at turning any part of this situation around for an individual, for a small family, at the level that we can grapple with in our day-to-day framing. Anything that you've seen that helps?
well, I'm happy to address that, but I'm also saddened by the fact that we're pretty screwed the way we live now.
Mm-hmm.
The nuclear family, so appropriately named, I call it it's in the book. It's a lifeboat floating away from the sinking Titanic that was our previous clan-based society, where we really had a meaningful role. We were loved by the many in our clan. We did anything for anybody. We shared everything. These things were egalitarian. Capitalism came when we shifted from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle to sedentary agriculture. And suddenly, the first time, capitalism, the founding principle of capitalism is surplus, surplus of goods and services. And
Mm-hmm.
so suddenly there was a grain surplus, and we needed people to keep track of that. So we had our first bankers, and, on it went
Mm-hmm.
from there. And and our health declined from that point forward. Those first farmers were very unhealthy people.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I quite honestly, what the question that I ask online, and I'm commenting all the time. I don't know if you've seen my other comments on other YouTube videos. I love YouTube, and I'm constantly commenting. Is the question is, do we really want to bring another child into this world at this time? And that's a that's a painful realization. Um, and and we've got all these capitalist corporations pushing us, along with the politicians, to have ever more children, produce ever more workers, ever more consumers. I communicate regularly with a woman up in Ottawa, Canada, who's the president of the Population Institute of Canada, who I highly recommend everybody. She has a great website, and she actually just she just did an essay 2 days ago. She published that really does a whole um, um, review and lots of quotations from my book and stuff. And so her name is Madeline Weld. She has a PhD. I'm not sure what it's in, but she's very bright and she's a very good writer. And Population Institute of Canada, PIC. And anyway, um, she's her issue is, immigrant population sort of streaming into Canada. The population there has doubled from 20 million to 40 million in a fairly short time, and it just keeps going up, and the government keeps pushing for, more and more folks. It's kind of laughable when you consider the situation in the United States. I mean, you know, one of my favorite little thought experiments for people is, if do you think anywhere in this country now you can step foot out of your automobile, walk 5 feet into whatever the surrounding is, and think you're not going to get arrested or shot at? You're on private property. I mean, there is no more frontier here. There are no more, there's no more land unless you pay the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So my favorite place on the planet, which you're not too far from, is the Esalen Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with Esalen?
Oh, yeah.
You've been there?
I have not. Actually, I have been, but only to do the soaking in the tubs on the cliffs above the ocean. I have not gone there for a workshop.
Well, soaking in the tubs on the cliffs above the ocean is one of my favorite things in the world. Those sulfur hot springs used to be everywhere. They are up and down. They run from San Francisco to LA, and you can find motels all along there that have the hot tubs that you can soak in and just stop in a motel. It's wonderful. Sulfur is Mother Nature's anti-inflammatory, and I would be so stressed out and dove up with arthritis, I'd go out there in a couple of days soaking in those tubs, and it was all gone. So here, unfortunately, like, I think West Virginia is the closest place to Greenbrier Inn, and I'm told it's extremely expensive and whatever, but we ought to have greater opportunities to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we just need to slow down and learn how to relax again, get into nature again, be in a community. We have so many forces pulling us apart. It's hard to get involved in a community that sticks together. I like what you're doing with these groups that I see that you're promoting and such. For me, it's, the 12-step groups and the groups that I'm in now. The place where I go now only has open meetings. I mean, every Tom, Dick, and Harry with every possible problem, whether it's eating disorders or, hard drug addiction or whatever, can come to those meetings. And it's just an incredibly healing place. And the vast majority of these groups are either closed. They don't want anybody in there that's not whatever a classical alcoholic is. And God forbid they mention anything about trauma. So, it's hard to find, I think, really good supportive meetings, but they provided for me, which allowed my trauma history to really surface when I came down here a year and a half ago at age 75, because of what I call the protection and care. It's a line from page 60 in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. We ask for his protection and care with complete abandon. And I'll say it probably in a noon meeting today. and throughout my entire life, I did not have the protection and care that I deserved when I was
Yeah.
brought into this world. And that's the problem, I think, with so many children. And any way we can reconstruct a protective and caring, loving, group experience, I'm all for it. I've probably led thousands of groups on inpatient, psychiatry units and stuff, and they were always so healing. I mean, it was a great fun to be there, and watch people heal and develop and be able to go back and face the world again. One of my staff members, who was an art therapist, she said, the problem when you were running that unit at the University of Rochester is that you'd get people well, and then they'd come back 2 weeks later. All they had to do was go out in the real world again, and they were a wreck.
Right.
So,
Right.
because the real world is just not like that. And so we have to make a real world that is supporting and caring. Some churches, of course, do that. And I think there's a revival movement going on down here anyway. And
Mm.
that's good to a point. It doesn't work for me, but same thing as with the 12-step groups. There's more and more, halfway houses, etc.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
limiting noise exposure, limiting
Right.
visual stimulation, facing the fact that we're all addicts. There's a YouTube
Yeah.
video that says that. Are we all addicts? Yes, we are.
Yeah.
We're burning out our dopamine and our endorphin and serotonin systems, and which is why we need all these damned antidepressants, to try to get those systems operating again. And that's what I did. I wrote 1 million prescriptions during my 42 years, and got really good at it. And
Yeah.
it has to be done, with experiential knowledge.
Yeah.
And I never met another psychiatrist who had it. Never.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to use several agents. You have to use them in concert. You have to use them in a balanced array. You have to understand the molecular biology. I've never met anybody else who did. And that's part of what I tried to explain in the book.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I again just want to mention a few of the things that go on in that ladder of engagement that I talked about in this
Yeah.
work of this little organization called Living Resilience. And I already talked a little bit about that entry level where most people don't really get into this kind of stuff until they're really forced to.
Yeah.
That we talked about a hurricane or the fire hits your area,
Right.
whatever it is, something nudges you into, man, I need some help here.
Yeah.
How I've lived my life and what I've been taught up till now is not enough to handle what this stuff is.
Yeah.
So that pushes a person, or, it can suggest to a person that they do some training, that
Yes.
they learn how to sit in circle with other people.
Yes.
That's not something that's intuitive. It's a skill set, and it's been a
Yes.
real privilege for me to be in a really well run, responsible group of folks sitting in circle together, like the vast majority of 12-step meetings that I've been a part of, or other process oriented groups. Anyway, there's a whole series, a whole menu, just a nearly endless list of various practices of reconnection that people can choose from. If their focus is connecting with Earth in this, let's say, the next 3 months, I want to reconnect with the Earth at a level I've never had before. And what that ends up being is a lot of what you were just talking about. There's activating practices, things that stimulate us in areas in our system that have not been stimulated in a long time, been really suppressed.
Yes.
There are calming practices, which I think are the ones that are the most popular. I mean, there's a million different videos teaching you how to have a mindfulness practice, a meditation practice,
Yes.
to be able to self-regulate, bring ourselves back to that normalized, or it's hopefully a healthier state of being in a restful state. But in my experience, there are more than just those two. And rarely activating practices are not nearly as popular as the quieting, calming practices tend to be. And we both mentioned a little bit about what I would call desaturating practices, because we
Yes.
are in a constant 24/7
Yes.
fire hose
Yes. I
of
like that
content and
image.
stimulation. And what's been both a blessing and a curse on top of that is, since I wrote my book, one of the few things I actually predicted pretty well. Other things not so well, but this one is I predicted that there would be a tsunami of information about the content of what's going on, how much we're screwing up the
Right.
climate, and all the doomer news would be
Right.
huge, which
Right.
it is.
Yeah.
And then so you've got the malicious fire hose, which is all the sales, all the propaganda, all the PR, all
Yeah.
the mind control at mass levels.
Yeah.
That's it's its own remarkably malicious fire hose.
Yeah.
Then you've got this other one coming in, which is some of the most beautiful and powerful writings and
Uh-huh.
videos and other kinds of content, including beauty and music and art,
Yeah.
that inspire us and really speak to the best of us.
Uh-huh.
But it is also now coming at such a volume, I can't possibly keep up with it. And that's
Okay.
the good stuff.
Yeah.
It's so it becomes
Yeah.
another kind of fire hose. Thank goodness
Yeah.
it's a little less malicious, but oh my God.
Yeah.
So there's one last kind of practices that I'd like to speak about. So that was the desaturation practices, that
Yeah.
finding a way to cultivate stillness and to
Yes.
cultivate a relationship directly with nature, and so on. The list does go on and on. Is a centering practice, finding there are certain elements in ourselves that we are, as we talked about a few minutes ago, we're intentionally kept rocked back on our heels. We're
Yeah.
knocked off center intentionally. One of the easiest ones to talk about is our mental center. We are not trained and even educated to have a center where we can make sense of our world, where we can find what's used to be called common sense, kind of
Yes.
street sense. This is a way that we can process the world around us that comes from a sense of being centered rather than armored and protected, or
Yes.
pathologically projecting, or being in some cultish whirlwind of
Yeah.
gossip and negativity and so on. So the to whatever degree we can find a center in various aspects of ourselves, I believe it's far more potent than some if really the vast majority of folks that I talk with, the best they've got is a meditation practice. That's 1 in 1,000, and that's great that they have that. But if all they've got is a vipassana or a mindfulness meditation, they are finding a center in a tiny sliver of their entire system.
Yes.
So it's kind of a multi-dimensional thing. A number of different aspects of ourselves. And what I find when we do sit in circle, or I figure out what matters most to me, and I curate my set of practices, and you do the same. There's a way that we are a lot like martial artists getting out on
Uh-huh.
the mat and practicing.
Uh-huh.
It isn't to just be still all the time. Hell no, you get out there and you spar,
Yeah.
and you spar with each other, and you each get to grow, and you challenge
Yeah.
the shit out of each other.
That's what Buddhist monks do.
Okay.
Yeah. They have that practice, if you've seen it, where they're challenging each other and sticking their finger in each other's faces. And it's a big part of their discipline.
Got it.
Yeah, it's cool as hell.
Yeah. So, Greg, man, I could just tell we've got with your permission, I'm gonna set up a chain of a series of us talking together. I could see us doing this from time to time over the course of this year as a very regular part of this focus on mental health and physical health in the face of predicament. Um,
Cool.
I'm wondering if you would be willing to, if there's some number of people who are watching this podcast today and they're relatively new to the conversation, but they've been resonating with some of the pieces that you and I have both been talking about.
Yeah.
Massive, constant stressors, making
Yeah.
just hugely derogatory to our systems. How how would you suggest that they start their exploration of finding their own center, finding their own practices, finding their own way of self-regulating first, but then even more important, co-regulating with the people that what they love, that they love. Um,
Well,
could
first,
you, yeah,
you know, first
anything
they
you would
need to
suggest?
establish the diagnosis. And what I recommended to my patients, and I do it myself, is go sit in a darkened room for 5 minutes and, simply sit there
Yes.
and see if you can tolerate being alone in a quiet, darkened room for 5 freaking minutes, because most of us can't. We're going to reach
Mm,
for that damn smartphone. We're going to,
yeah.
we're going to plug back into stressful stimuli in one
Yeah.
form or another. I see people walking around now with a smartphone. I mean, it's as bad as the automobile.
Mhm.
I mean, just constant feeding stimuli, visual stimuli, our avian, our bird brain, our dinosaur brain is absolutely tuned to movement. And that's how they do it on the commercials on TV. If you watch a commercial, they're constantly doing frame changes, every second in
Yes.
order to demand the bird brain to pay attention. We can't control that unless we turn the damn thing off.
Yeah.
And I have a flip phone. I won't have a smartphone.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
use a computer and a flip phone, and
Yeah.
that's it. And I walk, and I don't carry the phone with me. Now, maybe sometime I'm gonna wish I had the phone in some emergency. I should probably just, turn it off and carry it with me, which I do if I
Right.
go on a long trip. But escape escape all this stimulation. I live in this little, this was actually the first settlement in the Northwest Territory, Marietta, Ohio, 1788, settled by Revolutionary War veterans, right? And it's everybody says hello to each other on the
Mm.
street.
Mm.
People are kind to one another. It's like the clan. I mean, the smaller is better, and it's like you're talking about your group experiences.
Yeah.
If if you can't sit in a room for 5 minutes and without having to seek out more stimulation, you got a problem, and you need to start looking into it, and you need to start looking into the core of it, which is this incredible overactivation of the stress system, which you're clearly aware of and talking about. And it's just, we have to withdraw from all of this stressful stimulation and plug into the de-stressing uh, 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 phenomena like running water. Some psychologists did a study of de-stressing stimuli.
Mhm.
9 of the 10 were water. Nine of the
Yes.
10
Yes.
in one form or another.
Yeah.
That's what we loved about Esalen, sitting in those tubs and listening to the ocean waves crash below. And,
Right. Yeah.
I had a sailboat. I was never happier than I was out on Lake Huron or off the southeast coast of the United States when I lived in Savannah in that damn sailboat. I just, everything else just disappeared.
Yeah.
It was just
Yeah.
me and the wind and the water
Mm.
and
Beautiful.
occasional, people going along with me.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So there are ways to design a life that is much less stressful than the one we are accepting today.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're tuned into that, and we need to further explore that. And in a time of what is ever more obvious climate collapse, I don't like the word climate change. That's passe as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
This is climate collapse. And if you haven't been watching the weather, and I'm an old sailor and I do, these storm systems, I mean, it's every couple of days. We're pumping all this heat energy into the environment, and we wonder why these storms are just going crazy.
Yeah.
This summer is going to be out of sight. The hurricane season and the whole thing, all these tornadoes. Hell, they've had all these tornadoes all through the winter, let
Yeah.
alone what's going to happen, tornado season comes around, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So
Looks like we've got a El Nino coming in probably around August of this year, which is is a whole different conversation, but it's right on track with what you're pointing to. So yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Gregg, thank you so much for taking this time. I hope you don't mind if I bug you in a month or so and possibly set up the next in what could be a series, as far as I'm concerned, of conversations. I'd like to talk more about what you cover in your book, Stress R Us, next time. And I'll be sure to put, if I could get you to actually send me a few links that would connect me with things that you find useful, and also for your book as well. So
well,
I just it's just really been a pleasure.
the book is
Yeah.
available free online.
Uh-huh.
Only just have to Google the title, Stress R Us with the letter R,
Uh-huh.
and there will be several sites that will pop up. The second one has a free PDF,
Great.
so all you have to do is download the PDF and enjoy.
All right. Well, I will look that up and put the link in our show notes for this particular episode. And just really thank you for your lifetime of important work, and you bringing in quite vulnerably and in an important way your own direct experience in the topics we've been talking about. It's really been a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
It's been a great pleasure for me as well. It's wonderful to meet you and to have some a sense of the work that you're doing. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us in another episode of The Poetry of Predicament. This podcast is produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance. Living Resilience exists to offer transformative support and resources to the collapse-aware and collapse-acceptant communities around the world. Our sole purpose is to curate and offer coaching, support groups, courses, and events that assist people in expanding their core skills, competencies, and capacities for facing a troubled, predicament-laden, yet still ineffably miraculous world.